Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Lulu Essie podcast, where we build mental fitness, confidence, and self-love by following your own blueprint, on your own terms, and at your own pace. I'm your host, Lulu Essie, and these are honest, unedited conversations about doing the real inner work of becoming who you truly are, with simple tools that meet you exactly where you are. I invite you to open your heart and your mind as we get into today's conversation. Let me start by sharing something that happened to me last week. I went to see a sleep specialist at New York University's Langone Health, one of the best sleep centers in New York. I walked in ready for the full clinical experience. I was expecting to spend the night there in the near future, hooked up to monitors, studied, and measured. I wanted the data. I wanted the answers. I wanted someone to tell me exactly what was wrong with my sleep and precisely how to fix it. And the professor looked at me and said something I was not expecting. He said, given everything your body and your brain has been through, given your history, given the years, what you're experiencing is pretty much to be expected. He said, some nights you'll sleep okay, some nights you won't. Some nights you might sleep well. And the best thing you can do is stop watching the clock, try to keep a regular schedule, and stop chasing the perfect number of hours. I walked out without a prescription, without a sleep study, without a protocol, and honestly, I felt a little lost and a little pissed off at first, because I had gone looking for science, and the scientist had told me to go back to basics, to listen to my body, to stop letting the data create anxiety, to stop listening to everything I was seeing everywhere and thinking it was all an undisputed verdict on my sleep. And on the way home, I started thinking about how many of us are doing exactly this. Not only with sleep, but it seems like with everything right now. Everywhere you look, the wellness world is drowning us in terminology. Nervous system regulation, co-regulation, polyvagal theory, somatic practices, vagal tone, window of tolerance, parasympathetic activation, neuroception. And I say this with someone who has done entire episodes on this podcast about the nervous system and also about polyvagal theory. I've shared the science with you. I believe in the science, and I want to make that very clear. But I'd like to ask a question today that I think is worth really considering. For those of us who aren't neuroscientists or doctors, for everyday people just trying to live their lives, how helpful is all of this language? Not the science underneath it. The science is real and important. I'm talking about the avalanche of vocabulary that has attached itself to the science and asking, is it helping us? Or is it giving us one more thing to feel like we're not doing correctly? Is it giving us one more thing to optimize so we don't fall behind and fail? Here's something I think we forget. These practices, the things underneath all of this terminology, they have always existed. People have always taken deep breaths to calm down before a difficult conversation. People have always known when a room didn't feel safe and found a reason to leave. People have gone for a walk to clear their heads. Mothers have always held to their crying child and hummed to them until the child's breathing slowed down to match theirs. Friends have always sat with each other in silence when one of them was going through something hard, not fixing anything, just being there. Our grandmothers didn't call it co-regulation. They called it holding their child. Our aunt didn't call it a somatic practice. She called it going for a walk. Your colleague who always seemed calm in a crisis didn't know they were practicing vagal toning. They had just learned over years of living how to steady and ground themselves. What's happened is that we've given clinical language to things the body has always known how to do. And that is not a bad thing on its own. It can be very helpful. Naming something can be powerful. I've talked about that on this podcast before. The importance of naming a pattern, of understanding what's happening inside you. However, somewhere along the way, the language has started to replace the knowing. The terminology has become the thing instead of the experience being the thing. Yes, the clinical scientific knowledge is now the focus and not the experience. And we are so focused on whether we are doing nervous system regulation correctly, whether we're using the right technique, whether we understand the right framework, that the self-assessment has become its own sort of anxiety. Our self-assessment. Let's pause on that for a moment. You do not need to know the word polyvagal to know that your chest gets tight when you're in a conversation that doesn't feel safe. You do not need to know the term sympathetic activation to know that your heart is racing and you need to step outside. You don't necessarily need to understand neuroception to know that something about a situation felt off long before you could explain why. Your body has been communicating with you your entire life. It has been sending you signals, giving you information, guiding you toward safety and away from threat, long before any of these terms existed in our vocabulary. The question has never been whether you know the right words. The question has always been whether you're listening to your body. And this is what can make a meaningful difference in our lives. Not the vocabulary, not the words, but the listening. And here's what I think happens when we get too deep into the terminology. We start to outsource our knowing. We start to believe that unless we can name what's happening in clinical language, we don't really understand it. We start to think that reading about vagal tone is the same as actually pausing when your body tells you to pause. We start to study the map instead of walking the path. I've done this myself. I have spent hours reading about sleep science, about circadian rhythms, about optimal sleep architecture. And last week, a specialist looked at me and said essentially, put the research down and listen to your body. That is not a failure of language. That is the limit of knowledge. That is a point where knowing more doesn't help us, where the next article, the next framework, the next term doesn't bring us closer to ourselves. It actually takes us further away because we're up in our heads now instead of in our bodies where the real information lives. That is where our signals live. And if there's a ball of anxiety sitting somewhere in your body right now, that might be why. Here's what I'd like to offer you today. And it's an offer, not a prescription, because this podcast has never been about telling you what to do. You have permission to not know the terminology. You have permission to not understand polyvagal theory. You have permission to never use the phrase nervous system regulation in conversation and still be someone who is doing deep, meaningful, real inner work. Because the work has never been about the words. The work is in the listening. The work is in the pausing. The work is in the moment you notice something doesn't feel right and you honor that, even if you can't name it. I have given you tools on this podcast. I have shared the traffic light system, the nervous system check-in, the wiggle, the arrival, and I stand behind all of them. But I'd like you to hear me when I say this. If none of those tools are what you use, if what works for you is simply placing your hand on your heart and breathing, that is enough. If what works for you is going for a walk, if what works for you is calling someone who makes you feel safe, if what works for you is sitting quietly for 2 minutes before you start your day, that right there is the work. You are doing it. You don't need a clinical term to validate that you are doing the work. So here's a tiny practice for this week. The next time you catch yourself going down a rabbit hole of wellness terminology, the next time you're 3 articles deep into something about your nervous system, or your sleep, or your hormones, or your cortisol level, and you notice that the reading is making you feel more anxious rather than less, the next time that happens, pause. Close the screen, close the tab, and ask yourself one question. What is my body telling me right now? Not what is the science saying, not what is the expert recommending, not what did the article advise. What is your body right now, in this moment, telling you? That question is the whole practice. Coming back to your body. The body doesn't speak in jargon. The body speaks in tightness and ease, in restlessness and calm. The body speaks in heaviness and lightness, in agitation and peace. And you already know how to read it. You've been reading it your entire life, long before anyone told you what to call it. Trust that. This episode is on my YouTube channel, along with my shorts with mental fitness tools. Subscribe while you're there, and please follow my show. You probably hear this from all podcasters, and that's because it really does help. Follow the show and share. please share this episode. What comes from the heart reaches the heart, and today, with a hope that you will return to listening to your body and the knowing it holds. This comes straight from my heart to yours. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, beauties, the world needs our humanity, not our perfection.